Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on, well, it's one of the most intellectually exhilarating missions we've ever faced, I think.
I'd agree with that.
We've been given this stack of sources, articles, historical research, critical reviews, all compiled into one singular, very unusual text.
It's a book, but not really a book in the traditional sense.
Exactly. It's composed almost entirely of these fragmented, cross-referenced anecdotes about artists and thinkers, a sort of intellectual collage. Our goal is tailored for you, the learner. Gain knowledge quickly but thoroughly by extracting the absolute essential nuggets of wisdom and insight from this unique body of material.
It's a spectacular shortcut, really. The source material is essentially an anti-novel.
An anti-novel. I like that.
Yeah, it bypasses all the exposition, all the lengthy descriptive passages, and it presents us instead with thousands of discontinuous, non-linear, sometimes hilarious, sometimes heartbreaking facts.
Just the raw data points.
Exactly. It's an assemblage of data points that, when you view them together, they paint this massive mural of genius and struggle. Our mission is to connect those dots, to find the deep currents linking extraordinary creativity, profound personal cost, and the cold, hard, ultimately indifferent process of history.
And the genius of this structure is that it forces you to synthesize. You're absorbing a century of intellectual references and allusions almost instantly, but anchoring this vast sea of, historical trivia is a crucial, deeply human thread.
The consciousness of the man who is compiling it all.
Right, known only as Novelist.
And that thread provides the pathos. It grounds the entire deep dive. Interspersed amongst all these anecdotes of Michelangelo and Joyce are the novelist's brief, stark status updates.
Which are they're brutally poignant.
They are.
Old, tired, sick, alone, broke.
Yeah.
That simple declaration, repeated throughout the text, it just forces us to compare the towering legacy of the greats to the stark, solitary reality of the creator still in the arena, regardless of how finished or famous his work is.
That struggle is timeless, and it confirms the stakes.
So our core question for this deep dive is this. What does this entire accumulation of surprising facts, the hilarious, the tragic, the utterly bizarre, what does it tell us about the cost of creativity and the capricious nature of memory?
A huge question.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we have to start with a necessary dose of humility, examining how the history we hold sacred was often dismissed as just garbage upon arrival.
Let's do it. Let's begin by challenging that myth of immediate recognition. We tend to view these canonical works, the certified classics, as having been universally admired from the get-go.
Right, like they just appeared fully formed and everyone said, a masterpiece.
Exactly. But the sources reveal this crushing paradox of fame. Many works now considered the absolute pinnacle of human achievement were not just criticized, they were violently rejected.
Violently, yeah.
Condemned as morally corrupt, structurally unsound, or just unintelligible garbage.
It's an extraordinary reminder of the fragility of cultural memory, as the source material's critics noted in praise of the author's earlier work. Time moves so swiftly, and what is revered today was often reviled yesterday.
Which shows you exactly how untrustworthy contemporary critical consensus can be.
Absolutely.
Let's take Walt Whitman's revolutionary collection, Leaves of Grass. It wasn't just met with lukewarm reviews. It was greeted with pure moral horror.
Not just, I don't like the poetry.
No. The sheer force of the insults hurled at him is just staggering. He was called venomously malignant,
Wow.
noxious, blasphemous, and entirely bestial. The underlying offense was his refusal to adhere to traditional poetic structure, and crucially, his open celebration of the body and sexuality.
Yes, and the critics, they seemed desperate for stronger language, so they leaned into outright abuse. Beyond grotesque and disgusting, one particularly archaic and aggressive term stood out to me.
I think I know the one you mean.
Epiphallic audacity. Let's just pause on that phrase. It's such a specific, loaded term. It refers explicitly to the depiction of the erect phallus. What does the use of such extreme, almost hysterical language tell us about the cultural shock Whitman was deliberately causing?
It tells us he didn't just challenge poetic form. He challenged the entire Victorian morality structure.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. To use epiphallic audacity is to accuse the poet of intentional, provocative obscenity. Not just bad taste, but of fundamental moral failing. He wasn't just a bad writer in their eyes. He was a societal threat.
A danger.
A danger. And this wasn't an isolated incident. The sources are just filled with examples of literary giants enduring similar venom.
The Romantic poets faced it too, which confirms that this immediate dismissal spans centuries. Percy Bysshe Shelley's best work poetry we now study as essential romanticism was simply called abominable.
It's abominable. That's a total repudiation, not an artistic quibble.
Right, it's not a critique.
And William Wordsworth, the foundational poet of the common man and nature, his work was dismissed with truly childish insults. Infantile.
Infantile.
Absurd. Driveling. And perhaps the most dismissive of all, nauseating.
Nauseating.
It forces you to realize that these literary pillars were once seen as pure, disposable trash. The initial consensus was that they were failures, and often morally repulsive ones at that.
And this pattern continued, and you could argue it peaked, with the modernists in the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
James Joyce's Ulysses.
Oh, boy.
Right. Arguably the most important novel of that century, caused an absolute explosion of derision. The critics simply didn't know what to do with stream of consciousness and, everyday vulgarity elevated to high art.
E.M. Forster called it a dogged attempt to cover the universe with mud.
Cover the universe with mud.
And Virginia Woolf, who certainly pushed boundaries herself, settled for conscious and calculated indecency.
She dismissed the work further as tosh.
Tosh. Just a simple term meaning rubbish or nonsense. It's incredible how often the great critics of the time resorted to the simplest, most dismissive language when faced with genuine innovation. They couldn't dissect it, so they simply discarded it.
T.S. Eliot's experience with the wasteland was no better. It's difficult now to imagine a world where this poem, which is so foundational to understanding the anxieties of modernity, was attacked so fiercely.
The Times Literary Supplement.
What did they say?
They said it was parodying without taste or skill, and found it very near the limits of coherence.
Near the limits of coherence.
And the New Statesman piled on, attacking the famous footnotes, calling the work unintelligible, the borrowings cheap, and the notes useless.
Wait, the notes are useless?
The notes are useless. Think about that. They didn't just dislike the poem, they called it scholarly apparatus, which is now studied extensively, useless. This demonstrates a complete failure to recognize the intellectual scaffolding supporting a masterpiece.
That's incredible. And even an established American master like William Faulkner didn't escape this cycle. Years after his initial success, Absalom,
Yeah.
one of his most structurally complex and profound books.
A monster of a novel.
Right. It was dismissed by a critic as the final blow-up of what was once a remarkable, if minor, talent.
Minor talent.
The audacity of declaring one of the greatest American novels the final blow-up of a minor talent is. It's breathtaking.
And this wasn't confined to the written word. If anything, the reception of revolutionary visual art was even more physically visceral.
Right.
The sources draw a historical comparison to illustrate the long memory of critical outrage. In 1765, Denis Diderot reviewed François Boucher, and he questioned what could possibly be in the mind of a man who spends his life with prostitutes of the lowest order.
Wow.
The source notes, quite wryly, that the concept of libel was evidently absent in those days, allowing for such blatant personal attacks disguised as art criticism.
So that really sets the stage for the Impressionists then. Edouard Manet's Olympia, now a high point of the Western canon, was met with total fury.
Utter fury.
Critics were outraged not just by the nudity, but by the fact that she was a contemporary woman gazing directly at the viewer with this unnerving confidence.
And the complaints were almost medical. They were attacking the very flesh being depicted. We see an early critic informing Renoir that a woman's body is not a mass of flesh in a state of decomposition.
Decomposition.
On which the green and purplish spots denote a complete state of cadaveric putrefaction. The critics literally saw disease and death where Renoir saw light, color, and life. They could not accept the new form and therefore diagnosed it as rot.
So the initial Impressionist exhibitions were just treated as a joke.
Completely. Le Figaro famously dubbed the contributors to the first show 5 or 6 lunatics.
Lunatics.
And Paul Cézanne, who Matisse would later venerate as a sort of god of painting, had one critic viciously call his paintings the paintings of a drunken privy cleaner.
A drunken privy cleaner. I mean, that is a level of personal insult that goes far beyond aesthetic judgment.
And we can't forget the parallel revolution in music. Arnold Schoenberg, whose atonality revolutionized classical composition.
Right, another huge shift.
He was called a man either utterly devoid of sense or one who takes his listeners for fools.
And even the earlier masters weren't immune, right?
Not at all. Beethoven's monumental Eroica Symphony was, upon its debut, deemed unendurable to the music lover.
Unendurable.
Mozart's D minor quartet was dismissed as evidence of a depraved ear. This wasn't about liking or disliking the melody. It was about accusing the composers of lacking fundamental talent or sanity.
Even the most romantic of operas faced condemnation.
Oh, absolutely. Kristen and Isolde was the most repulsive thing I ever saw or heard in my life, according to Clara Schumann.
Clara Schumann said that.
She did. The fact that the most celebrated and studied music in the world was once deemed repulsive shows us that art valuation is fundamentally unstable at the moment of creation.
This forces a profound question for the listener then. If those critics, educated, professional, well-paid, were so consistently hysterically wrong about Shelley, Joyce, Manet, and Beethoven, how confident can we possibly be in the judgments we make today?
The realization is that the critical consensus of the moment is often completely flawed. The value of art is usually only verified by time, a concept John Steinbeck captured perfectly when he said time is the only critic without ambition.
I love that. The only critic without ambition.
Time has no agenda, no literary rivalries, no moral panic to uphold.
And speaking of agenda, the source material reminds us that even the concept of a classic writer is subjective, often shaped by petty feuds. Thomas Hardy dismissed a fellow writer, Andrew Lang, with a truly cutting line. He called him a gentleman who turned Christian for half an hour.
It's a snapshot, isn't it, of the small personal vendettas that color the way we judge and categorize genius.
It really is.
The sources show us that the greatest minds often existed outside of and in direct opposition to the prevailing taste of their era. And this, in itself, is a central theme of the source material's fragmented style. It gives the learner the essential intellectual synthesis by adhering to the philosophy of Ivy Compton Burnett.
What was her philosophy?
She believed that exposition and description were simply unnecessary in a novel. The facts must speak for themselves.
So the public was hysterically wrong about their genius. But if that was the judgment outside the artist's studio, what was the price they were paying in their private lives? Let's transition now from the crushing verdict of the critics to the often messy reality of these groundbreaking lives.
Yeah, let's explore that extraordinary contrast between their grand ideas and their ground-level, often impoverished existence.
We've established that external validation is fragile and often delayed by centuries. So now let's unpack the internal cost. The source material draws this sharp contrast between the towering artistic legacy and the often humiliating, poverty-stricken, or bizarre daily reality of the world's great talents.
It confirms what Leonardo observed generations after Leon Battista Alberti warned against it.
Which was,
"O painter, take care lest the greed for gain prove a stronger incentive than the desire for renown, for this latter achievement is a far greater thing than riches."
and that tension, the pursuit of renown over riches, it really defines this next part. The sources are just rife with examples showing that genius rarely provided financial stability.
In fact, it often led directly to ruin.
Let's consider Rembrandt, a name that's synonymous with artistic wealth and legacy. Yet, at the height of his career, around age 50, he faced absolute bankruptcy.
Total bankruptcy. His possessions, including his massive collection of his own paintings, were sold for a pittance.
A pittance. The sources note he was evicted from his home. How do we reconcile the monumental status of his work today with the fact that his contemporaries saw him as a financial failure whose art couldn't even keep him housed?
The dissonance is just profound. And it gets even more poignant when we look at Johannes Vermeer, the master of light and quiet domestic scenes.
Oh, this story is heartbreaking.
In 1663, a French visitor looking for inexpensive art was literally shown a Vermeer on display in a pastry shop.
A pastry shop.
It was almost certainly being held there as security for a debt to the baker.
The painter of serene domestic light dying because he couldn't afford bread for his family. That juxtaposition is the core thesis of the source material.
And the debt wasn't small or temporary. When Vermeer died in 1675, one of his largest creditors was that very same Delft baker.
Still owed him money.
Still.
Huh.
For bread used to feed a family of 13. The man immortalized for capturing light was extinguished by the very mundane burden of feeding his children.
And this thread of overwhelming financial struggle, it just weaves throughout literary history as well. You think of Edgar Allan Poe, late in his life, so impoverished he couldn't afford the postage necessary to mail his manuscripts to publishers.
Imagine that.
The sources mention Thomas Nash, a significant Elizabethan satirist who died at 31, his exact location and cause of death completely unknown to history. Oblivion often started not after death, but long before.
Even the American moderns struggled relentlessly. The sources note that Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, during their first 4 years in the East Hampton farmhouse that would become so famous,
Right, this iconic place.
they could not afford to install basic plumbing for heat and hot water. It was an intense physical struggle to simply survive while producing transformative art.
And then there's the profound, agonizing intersection of financial desperation and mental collapse, which is really exemplified by Van Gogh.
His letter from Arles, written weeks after the ear incident, carries this disturbing detail.
What was it?
He noted that locals told him things like that are not out of the ordinary in that country. The source suggests extreme behavior was perhaps more common than history records.
But the financial desperation is palpable, even in that final, tragic act. He borrowed the revolver he used to shoot himself,
Borrowed it.
claiming he needed it to fire at crows that were supposedly annoying him as he painted. The genius, overwhelmed by his mind and his finances, resorted to a desperate lie about crows just to get his hands on the means to end his pain.
And here, we just have to pause this parade of historical suffering. We have to insert the reality of the contemporary compiler.
Right.
The novelist, connecting his own pain to theirs, inserts his stark, painful summary.
Old, tired, sick, alone, broke.
Yeah. That one line summarizes all the preceding history. It says, "Nothing has changed. Genius still demands everything."
And the recognition follows immediately. All of which obviously means that this is the last book Novelist is going to write. This book, composed of fragments of historical struggle, is his final act of Al-Sikhan.
But the personal cost wasn't just financial or mental. It manifested in profound eccentricities and unorthodox arrangements. The sources reveal a stunning array of quirks among the greats, reinforcing that genius rarely conforms to standard social norms.
Let's talk about Rainer Maria Rilke. He was raised as a girl in girls' clothing until he started school at age 7.
Unbelievable.
This was seemingly at the behest of his mother, mourning a deceased daughter. I mean, imagine the psychological effect of this early life, shaping the poet who later collected lace and filled his apartments habitually overflowing with roses.
The personal identity was shaped by profound, forced strangeness.
Yeah.
The sources also reveal unorthodox domestic arrangements that defy modern sensibilities. Elizabeth Barrett Browning's son, Penn, slept in her bedroom until her death.
And how old was he?
He was 12. It's an unusual intimacy for that era, suggesting a deep, almost claustrophobic bond between our artistic mother and her child.
And the domestic rigidity of the mighty Sigmund Freud is equally striking.
Oh, this one is something else.
He ran his household in such a rigidly patriarchal manner that his wife was literally expected to spread the toothpaste on his brush each and every morning.
Every single morning. The man who analyzed the subconscious needs this ritualistic, daily act of domestic service to begin his day. It's a fascinating insight into the small tyrannies genius can breed.
And of course, the vices and habits were widespread, often destructive.
Absolutely. Laudanum addictions plagued major literary figures like Coleridge, Baudelaire, De Quincey, and Poe. Modigliani was infamous for his severe addictions to opium, hashish, and drink, habits which hastened his early death. These destructive patterns weren't exceptions, they were interwoven with the creative output.
But on the other hand, some eccentricities were purely intellectual, born of tireless curiosity. Late in life, Leo Tolstoy.
Right, already a master of Greek and Russian literature.
He began an intensive study of Hebrew with a Moscow rabbi. At an age when most people retire, he embraced a massive linguistic and cultural challenge.
And the methods of creation were just as unorthodox. Balzac, for instance, once sketched a large blank picture frame on his garret wall.
On the wall itself.
On the wall, and he designated it Painting by Raphael.
As a what? Like a talisman.
Exactly. As a penniless yet ambitious talisman for the success he craved. It's an extraordinary act of faith, conjuring success and recognition before he could afford paint, let alone a masterwork.
And Victor Hugo was a relentless documentarian of his own mind.
This is a great one.
He was so compulsive about making notes that he would actually turn aside in the middle of a conversation, a face-to-face exchange, to scribble down something he himself had just said that he thought might be a useful line later.
Everything was material, even his own casual dialogue.
It's amazing.
These tiny details, Balzac's imaginary painting, Hugo's compulsive scribbling, they show us that the path to the monumental achievement is paved with profound personal quirks and relentless effort. The source material even highlights a subtle irony in artistic rendering.
Tell me.
In a Rubens drawing of Achilles driving a spear into Hector's throat, Rubens depicted Achilles using his left hand despite Homer's text specifying the right.
So even the masters get the details wrong.
These small technical flaws persist even in monumental works created by the greatest masters.
So if we look at this collection of chaos, poverty, and quirks, what does it tell us about the novelist's choice of structure for this book?
I think it explains the fragmentation perfectly. In acknowledging his condition, his last book, all of which also then gives novelist carte blanche to do anything here he damned well pleases, he embraces freedom from convention.
It's a conscious decision.
It is a conscious decision to write in a personal genre, relying solely on intellectual reference and allusion, so to speak, minus much of the novel. It's an act of defiance, saying that the synthesized data is the story and the struggle of the compiler is the narrative frame.
It's the essential information without the overwhelming noise. It really validates that Ivy Compton Burnett observation that I do not see why exposition and description are a necessary part of a novel.
Exactly. The novelist strips away everything but the illuminating fact and the personal resonance. It's genius as synthesis.
So now that we've established the public rejection and the private cost, let's move into the heart of the deep dive, connecting the dots between these seemingly random facts to reveal the profound ironies of human history and memory.
Let's do it.
This is where the learner gets those powerful knowledge nuggets, the unexpected juxtapositions and ironies that shift your perspective on history itself.
Yeah, these are the moments where the world just failed to recognize genius in its own time.
And we find a classic example with Albert Einstein.
Oh, this is a great one. When his theory of relativity was verified by observations during a solar eclipse in November 1919, British physicists convened this major press gathering to announce what was arguably the biggest scientific discovery of the century.
A huge deal.
So the New York Times, tasked with covering this monumental news, assigned the story not to a science editor.
Who did they send?
They sent Henry Crouch, a golf reporter.
A golf reporter. That detail is incredible. It perfectly encapsulates humanity's consistent inability to recognize a truly momentous paradigm-shifting event in the moment.
The profound significance of bending space and time was reduced functionally to a sports story waiting for an opening.
Unbelievable.
We see a similar disregard for academic genius among the financially successful, highlighting the clash of worlds. Sam Goldwyn, the Hollywood mogul, once called Sigmund Freud the greatest love specialist in the world.
The greatest love specialist. Okay.
And he offered him a massive $100,000, an astronomical sum, for the era to supervise or write a romantic story for the screen.
And Freud, who at the time was asking what? A much more modest $20 an hour for his professional services.
Exactly. He dismissed Goldwyn's offer with a mere one-sentence note.
What does that exchange tell us?
It shows us that for true intellectual figures, money is secondary to academic pursuit and control. Goldwyn saw Freud's psychoanalysis as a marketable commodity, a way to sell love stories.
Right.
Freud saw it as serious work that couldn't be cheapened by a Hollywood spectacle. The gap between the genius's self-valuation and the entrepreneur's commercial valuation was just too wide to bridge, regardless of the size of the check.
And sometimes, even the most passionate supporters of new art lack true insight.
This is a fascinating one. Guillaume Apollinaire was an early critical champion of Cubism, writing important defenses of the movement.
A key figure.
A key figure. Yet the artist Georges Braque, one of the founders of Cubism, commented privately that Apollinaire was incapable of distinguishing a Rubens from a Rembrandt.
Wow. That is a staggering statement.
It is. It suggests that a primary critic and defender of an avant-garde movement might have lacked the basic technical knowledge to discern the difference between two of the world's most distinct old masters.
So it raises a really important question. Can enthusiasm and intellectual energy sometimes be more vital to launching a new movement than deep encyclopedic technical knowledge?
In the history of Cubism, the sources seem to suggest yes.
Let's shift to the intensely human. The sources provide these quiet, powerful details about the final moments of historical figures, contrasting their monumental lives with their intimate deaths.
Consider St. John of the Cross. His final meal, after escaping imprisonment where he was beaten and starved, was provided at a discalced Carmelite convent.
And what was it?
Pears simmered with cinnamon. A small, simple, comforting detail to mark the end of an agonizing, transcendent life.
Or the great philosophers. John Locke, the father of liberalism, died while sitting in a drawing room, listening to someone read from the Psalms.
Novelist, the early German romantic, died while listening to a relative play the piano. The end of life, regardless of fame or philosophical achievement, is so often marked by these quiet, domestic sensory details.
The smell of cinnamon, the sound of music, the comfort of familiar words.
Exactly. And we must also examine the sheer power of words and how memory preserves or distorts them. The sources highlight hilarious differences in ancient attempts to establish scale.
Like what?
The pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus judged the sun as wide as a man's foot.
A man foot.
A few centuries later, Lucretius decided it was the size of a foot soldier's shield. We forget that something as simple as astronomical scale was once a matter of profound, yet wildly inaccurate philosophical debate.
And famous, enduring quotes often have hazy or misinterpreted origins.
All the time. The maxim "fortune favors the brave," which we frequently attribute to Virgil's Aeneid.
Right. I thought that was Virgil.
It was actually said by the Roman playwright Terence decades before Virgil.
No way.
And the most enduring image of classical beauty, Helen launching 1,000 ships, which Marlowe immortalized in Dr. Faustus, that concept was written by Lucian 1,400 years before Marlowe.
So the original idea, the essential phrase, endures. But history often carelessly reassigns the credit to the more famous later poet.
It demonstrates that historical memory is more about cultural resonance than verifiable fact.
And the novelist, constantly synthesizing these historical tidbits, is acutely aware of how his own memory functions within this landscape of illusion and misattribution.
He is. He knows a phrase he just used: nobody comes, nobody calls.
And he recognizes that while it sounds precisely like something Samuel Beckett might have written,
It's actually a line he himself had said in an earlier forgotten book.
that's a deep meta-commentary on the genre. When you immerse yourself in a world built on intellectual reference, the line between influence and original thought just blurs completely.
And the novelist's present struggle is so great that he can barely recall which words belong to him and which belong to the collective history of genius.
The sources reveal a tragic silence regarding one great master, Vermeer.
This is so sad.
He repeated letters being read or written repeatedly in his domestic masterpieces, suggesting a great focus on communication. Yet, despite his fame and the preservation of many documents from Delft, not one known word of any sort in Vermeer's own hand exists in the real world.
Not a single letter.
His artistic voice is monumental and eternal, yet his personal correspondence, his handwriting, the direct trace of the man, is completely gone.
This absence underscores the novelist's methodology. He will say more about himself only when he finds no way to evade doing so, but rarely otherwise.
The focus must be on the collected data, the history of struggle, because his personal reality, old, tired, sick, alone, broke, is fading.
The book is his final, desperate act to keep the light of knowledge burning.
And this brings us to the most powerful, unifying philosophy in the source material, the Als ik kan motif.
The artist's ethos.
Right. Jan van Eyck used this phrase, meaning the best I can do, or if I can, on the frame of a portrait, a subtle signature of commitment.
And the novelist finds himself repeating it, reflecting on its modern, weary meaning. He wonders if it means, that's it, I can do no more. All I have left, I can go no further.
It's the ultimate statement of vulnerability and determination fused together.
It's the sheer physical, mental, and intellectual act of enduring right up to the final period.
And his attempt is to continue keeping himself off stage to the greatest extent possible, while compelling the attentive reader to perhaps catch his breath when things achieve an ending nonetheless.
He's forcing the reader to witness the final breath of creation, framed by the centuries of struggle preceding it.
And the novelist's effort stands in stark contrast to the efforts of those historical figures he documents, yet he belongs to their tradition.
We see the profound differences in creative discipline required to achieve immortality. Honoré de Balzac famously spent 26 consecutive days without leaving his study in a frenzied burst of creation.
Fueled by coffee and desperation.
Right. And then you have the industrial, methodical genius of Anthony Trollope, who wrote 250 words every 15 minutes, religiously, by the clock.
Total discipline, total structure.
And finally, Leonardo da Vinci, the ultimate perfectionist who devoted 4 continuous years to painting the Mona Lisa.
On a canvas covering just 5.5 square feet of surface area.
The commitment ranges from frenetic obsession to mechanical precision to agonizing perfectionism, but the effort, the cost, is consistent.
And that compressed, essential knowledge, Balzac, Trollope, Leonardo, is why the fragmented structure works so well for the learner. It gives you the full weight of history, the context of the struggle, without the necessity of reading 4 full biographies.
The source material also emphasizes the persistent, mundane, and often destructive presence of personal habits and physical tolls. We noted Freud's cocaine addiction, which was a significant factor in his life.
And Tchaikovsky's absolute dependence on alcohol, which he frequently noted in his diary. Genius often rides alongside or is fueled by these destructive habits.
And the physical decay is immense.
Yeah.
Rubens, still painting masterworks in his 60s, suffered from arthritis so severe that both hands were paralyzed by the end of his life.
Goya, one of history's greatest visual commentators, was profoundly deaf and had to read lips for the last 36 years of his 83-year life.
The body breaks down, but the creative impulse persists.
And the isolation, which the novelist highlights so intensely, is a constant companion. He notes his own isolation increasing as the years pass.
Listing days on which he is aware of speaking to no one at all, except perhaps a checkout clerk or his letter carrier, or some basically anonymous fellow tenant in the elevator.
It's the antithesis of the public stage, the reality behind the curtain for the solitary artist.
And it's also fascinating to note the unexpected modern connections. Einstein often went without socks.
A small, humanizing detail.
Marie Curie died from exposure to radiation, and 50 years later, the cookbooks she had once used were still contaminated. The power of the past, the physical and intellectual residue, continues to touch the present in unforeseen and often dangerous ways.
So the ultimate intellectual shortcut is provided by a character who is himself running out of time, forcing you to think about what is truly essential.
The artist creates, the critic judges, but only time validates or dismisses both, as John Osborne observed. Asking a working writer what he thinks about critics is like asking a lamppost what it feels about dogs.
The act is what matters.
And yet, even that act does not guarantee immortality. We have to remember that major figures like El Greco, Vermeer, Dirk Boots, and Franz Hals were all essentially forgotten, obliterated from critical memory for at least 2 centuries.
The fragility of memory is absolute, even for those whose works now anchor global museums.
The novelist's entire mission, compiling this encyclopedia of human effort, is an attempt to make sense of that inevitable end, to find pattern in the chaos of extraordinary human existence before he, too, succumbs to the universal certainty.
Which is, as Voltaire put it, the fate of man. The only animal that knows he must die.
In the fragmented book, the accumulation of facts becomes the structure that defies oblivion.
Okay, let's wrap this up.
The synthesis of our deep dive into this unique source material is clear. The book is an encyclopedia of human effort, framed by the struggle against personal oblivion.
Right. And by presenting these facts as bare, insightful nuggets, the learner receives the essential knowledge without the descriptive baggage that Compton Burnett believed unnecessary.
The discontinuity mirrors the chaos of both memory and history.
And that recurring element, old, tired, sick, alone, broke. It just stands in sharp, pathetic relief against the dazzling accomplishments of the giants we've discussed.
From the bankrupt Rembrandt to the addiction-plagued Poe.
And the humor found in the fragments. The Gulf Reporter, Balzac's imagined painting. It's poignant precisely because we know the final lines are certain.
Pascal perceived this perfectly, noting, "The last act is tragic, however happy all the rest of the play." That tragic awareness motivates the novelist's entire final work, his last act of Al-Sikkan.
It is the determination to create, even when nothing is left.
And the sources conclude with the recurring line of the novelist's fading condition, followed by a profound philosophical conclusion.
That philosopher states, "The old man who will not laugh is a fool." And this raises a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you integrate this knowledge. In the face of all the knowledge we've absorbed today, the struggles, the ironies, the inevitable and total end, is there anything left but the act of creation itself? Or perhaps the ability to find humor in the chaos of it all?
If the measure of a man's greatness, as Wittgenstein once suggested, is defined by what his work cost him, then the price has certainly been paid and the record compiled. The final response to oblivion is not despair, but maybe a wry acknowledgement of the absurdity of the entire human enterprise. Alisik, indeed.